Hey there, we're now going to talk about 3 mistakes that I would like to say that are made by amateurs only, but to a greater or lesser extent, all chess players make these mistakes. So let's start with the first one, which is to trade pieces whenever is possible. So let's see this idea with a position that we might get in the opening after the moves e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and after d4. Here we get the Scotch game. In this position, white is planning to either capture on e5 or to play d5, so taking the pawn on d4 makes sense. And after we capture with the knight, we get this very standard position. And here very often players capture on d4 immediately, which is actually not the best way to play for black. Here black might play a move like bishop to c5 or knight to f6, in both cases just developing. But here taking on d4, we might argue that we are trading a knight for a knight, and we might even say that the knight on d4 is slightly better than the knight on c6 because it's centralized. But whenever we trade pieces, we need to take into account the resulting position that we get after trading pieces. So here what black did is to force a position on which the queen came from d1 to d4. And very often a queen on the center is not well placed because it can be attacked easily, but in this particular position it's just very well placed. There's no easy way for black to attack the queen. For example, playing a move like c5 would be a positional mistake because now the queen can retreat. It doesn't have to go back to d1. It can go to d3, for example. There is more active. And now this square on d5 is weakened. This pawn on d7 is a backward pawn. It cannot advance without being captured. So here white has a very easy plan to go knight to c3, control this square, and white already has a slightly better position. So taking on d4 is not a decisive mistake, but it is just making life easier for the other side. Very often when we play against stronger opponents, we have this urge to trade pieces, but this is normally not a good idea. And black may attack the queen on d4 in a better way, for example knight to e7, but this is just wasting time. So now the knight will come to e7 and then to c6. And even after white continues the game, for example knight to c3 and knight to c6, now the queen can go back to another square like d3, and even here the queen is better placed than on d1. But players who trade on d4 directly in this position, they very often continue with the move queen to f6, going for more trades. And now here, if we evaluate the position from white side, taking would definitely not be a good idea because here we'll be trading this slightly more active queen for the queen on f6, and the queen on f6 is taking a very important square for the knight. So if we use the same principle after we trade queens and we evaluate the resulting position, we simply help black develop. So taking on f6, again, it's not a big mistake, it's a slight inaccuracy, but this really helps our opponent, and in this position black already has a perfectly playable position. We might consider other options. We could defend the queen because after the trade we would bring another piece to d4. We may even avoid this trade of queens because this queen on f6 is not that well placed. Now the knight on g8 will not develop that comfortably. Or another simple idea is to avoid the trade by playing the move e5, because here we just attack the queen and we still keep the queen on d4. And in these positions, white is definitely not winning the game, but white is already having a slight advantage. So never trade pieces automatically, just evaluate the resulting position and see if it makes sense or not. Another very common mistake is to focus on your own plans only. And let's evaluate this position and let's try to connect the dots with the other idea. So here in this position, trading rooks, unless we get something very particular in return, would simply help black because after the trade, black brought the rook from a8 to e8. So this doesn't make a lot of sense. We are just helping black improve its pieces. So with that in mind, in this position, a move like rook to e4 would make more sense because we just keep the pieces on the board, and if black trades, then this would just improve our queen. Now we even keep an eye on the pawn on b7, so this is something that white can definitely play in this position. But instead in this game, white played the move queen to b5, which at first sight might look attractive. White keeps the tension on the position, and now white has the idea to capture on e8 because the queen is also eyeing the rook on e8, the queen is also eyeing the pawn on b7, so it seems that black has some problems to solve. Surprisingly in this position, white resigned because after making the move, white's player, who is former world champion Vishwanathan Anand, realized that he made a terrible blunder because he was only focusing on his plans and completely missed black's idea, which was the idea to sacrifice the queen, to capture on f3, and after king takes, play knight to h4, and black is given a checkmate. If white doesn't capture on f3, black simply gets an extra piece. So it is great to focus on our plans, but it is also very important, even more important, to double check if our opponent has any big threats in the position. So here, after queen to b5, black had this very big threat of queen takes f3. So if we go back a move, here white should consider the move queen to b5 and wonder if black has any strong threat in the position. And actually, just to highlight how white completely missed this idea of queen takes f3, black even threatens to capture on f3 even in this position. For example, if white plays a move like a4, which won't change the position, here black still has this very brilliant idea of queen takes f3, because after king takes, we get this checkmate with knight to h4. Or if white captures with the queen on f3, then after knight to h4, black is getting the queen back and even keeping the extra piece, because the king cannot go to g3, the square is covered by the bishop. So after a move like king to f1 and knight takes f3, black gets an extra piece. So before making a move, ask yourself if your opponent has a big threat in the position to avoid making blunders. And by the way, if you want to check more amazing blunders, I have a video where I cover the most shocking blunders made by former world champions. And the last very common mistake is believing in your opponent. Very often your opponent will sacrifice material, might even look very confident when doing so, but you always have to double check whether this idea is good or not. Never believe in your opponent blindly. Let's see this with a very instructive example. Here in this position, white played the move rook to h7, white is a piece down, this knight on b5 is being attacked, but white just added fuel to the fire and played the move rook to h7, seemingly giving a rook because this rook is undefended, but white has this very strong idea of taking on g7, that's why we're not in time to take the knight on b5. And in this position, we definitely have to evaluate concrete lines. So here the general understanding might help, but this position, which is very tactical, has to be evaluated with concrete lines. So here taking the knight is not a good idea because of rook takes g7, but we have ideas to prevent that threat actively. For example, even a move like d4 is an interesting move because now rook takes g7 is not possible, but we definitely need to evaluate what would happen after capturing the rook first. So if we can capture a rook for free, we are definitely going to do it. So here the question is what would happen after king takes h7, and here we have a lot of extra material, so white has to count on very concrete ideas. One of them might be to play the move g6, at least this is a move that I would check in this position, and here we need to be a bit careful about the idea that after taking on g6, the f pawn is pinned, so after queen takes, we cannot capture the queen, and the queen is going to infiltrate on g7, so this is definitely dangerous for us. But after the move g6, we can evaluate the move king to g8, and this position might look a bit scary because one might have ideas to bring a queen to the h-file, for example play king to e2 and then bring the queen to h1 and then bring the queen to h7, but again we need to evaluate this more concretely. So here in this position, first of all, we also have ideas to go queen to h4, but we also have ideas to attack the pawn, for example with queen to e8 or queen to g6. If we capture this pawn, then the game is just completely over because we have an overwhelming material advantage. So this position is actually winning for black because white is not in time to create this checkmating attack. So after king takes h7, g6 doesn't seem to work. It might look a bit scary, but it doesn't seem to work. The other main idea that I see here is to capture on g4, using the same idea that this pawn f5 is pinned. And now we also have to be a bit careful. For example, after king to g8, queen to h5 might be a bit scary because white has this idea of going g6 and queen to h7. But here we might even consider a move like king to g6 because g6 is a big threat in the position. Even though king to g6 looks quite bold, now we also have the idea of going rook to h8 and we stop any attack on the h-file. But even possible is to go rook to h8 because we see that the main threat that white has is an attack on the h-file, so we can play rook to h8 and then plan to go king to g8 after either queen to h5 or g6, and black seems to be doing fine there. If white doesn't have anything convincing, we already have an overwhelming material advantage and a winning position. So it is definitely not possible to see all these moves in advance, but if we don't see a concrete line on which we lose, we can definitely go for these lines. Because very often our opponent will make this move bluffing, particularly in a losing position, So even though we might not see all the possible lines, our opponent might also not see them. So going for these lines makes a lot of sense. Because in the game after rook to h8, here black didn't capture the rook and played rook to f7, defending, which should normally be our last resource in the position. If we can play more actively, we should definitely go for it. And here after g6, now this rook is anchored on h7, black continued with rook to f6, and white's idea was not to capture the rook on f6. White still wants to create threats against black's king and played this very interesting try of king to e2, and after rook takes, went queen to h1, and the position might still be objectively winning for black, but the point is white is still attacking this position, and in the other lines we got an extra rook. Even though white got some initiative, in the other line we had more material. And here in this position white has this idea of going rook to h1, black continued knight to h6, and white here captured on g7. White is simply sacrificing because white doesn't have anything better than to give material and try to attack, and after rook takes and queen takes, the position might still be better for black, but white definitely has some tricks. So white has these two pieces trying to create an attack on the dark squares, and the rook on a1 will also join the party by going rook to h1, so this position is already, at the very least, difficult to play. In the game, black played queen to e7, and after knight to d6, the position was quite messy, and white even managed to win the game. Instead of queen to e7, black had a better way to defend, which was queen to f8, because here black also has this additional idea of taking on g2 and creating a discover attack on the queen. For example, here, after a move like knight to d6, black could have taken on g2, and then the queen on h6 would be attacked. So here, black still had a winning position, but black had to find very precise moves to defend the game, whereas in the other line, by taking the rook, black's defensive task was not necessarily more complicated, and black was keeping even more material. So don't believe in your opponents blindly. If you see that your opponent is sacrificing material and you don't see why you should not take that material, just grab that material. If you made a mistake in your calculations, you will learn from it and improve your tactical ideas for your next games. So keep in mind these common mistakes when playing your next games. I'm sure that you will improve your game if you do so. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.